Hello, thank you for your interest. What I'm going to discuss for the next few minutes is a new web-based report which MCC's Economic Development and Innovative Workforce Services Division has created. The report looks at middle-skilled occupational gaps within the 9-county Finger Lakes regional economy. This video will explore the report, showing how to navigate through it, and will provide suggestions for application. This report represents a new framework for MCC in its approach to workforce development, and as such, it will be updated to reflect changes in the data. So one of the first things to consider when you look at our report, and I think it's an important thing to understand, is the context why we created the report in the first place. And that is, in fact, to actually measure the middle skill gaps within our local economy. And it's important, and as many of you that are watching this are probably interested in your work, know that there are many reports, particularly the last 3 to 4 years, in our post-recessionary period, where we're looking at documenting gaps within so-called middle-skilled occupations, either at the national level or in some cases at the state level. What we really wanted to do as workforce practitioners, it was important for us to understand these gaps documented at our local level, which for us is our regional economy. And so what we've attempted to do in this book is to actually quantify those gaps amongst key workforce clusters in key occupational groups, which I'll explain in a moment. But not just quantify them as to if there is a gap and how large is it, but also to monetize, in many cases, what that gap is worth to the economy. So that's sort of, I think, important for me to have anybody looking at this report to understand that's sort of been the impetus or the reason why we began this project. So as you approach the book, you'll notice it's in a flipbook file format because we wanted this data to be visual and we want it to be very accessible to audiences that haven't been historically interested maybe in data. This is not a book that would be used to read from front to back. It's really more of a reference tool for our local workforce practitioners to be able to access good data. Let's just walk through the book quickly. The first is that you'll notice that it's essentially organized in 5 key chapters. That would be advanced manufacturing, skilled trades, information and computer technology, hospitality and tourism, and healthcare. And we treat those as actually workforce clusters. As you open the book, we have an introduction which does give some of the reason why we created the book. You'll notice across each of the pages you'll see a navigation bar on the left-hand page. And that takes you essentially to the major sections, chapters if you will, of the book. Lastly, you'll notice at the far end you'll have an appendix which has a lot of our methodologies defined as well as more elaborate explanations of the data. As you move to page 3, you'll see the breakout again. This is essentially the table of contents. You can look at each of the workforce clusters, and under each of those, the basically occupational groups that we're defining or aligning to these clusters. Those are all hyperlinks that will take you to that specific place. I'm going to click on advanced manufacturing. As it opens up that section, you'll see a description of our region, a description of the advanced manufacturing within the Finger Lakes region, and then the ability to dive right into those occupational groupings. In this case, I'm going to dive into tooling and machining. You'll notice now we're on page 7, and you'll see tooling and machining, that actual occupational group defined. And you'll notice in this case we have videos. Mostly throughout the book we have videos that we've produced in a separate project that actually document what this occupational group looks like in the Finger Lakes region. And they're used to promote the occupational group to K through 12 and really to retraining audiences. On the right-hand side, this is a critical component. This is essentially what defines what we call our occupational grouping. The occupational grouping is essentially our own way of defining the specific occupations by their SOC code or SOC that align to the programs that we teach here at the college. This has been vetted by faculty, it also has been vetted by industry, and it represents essentially the most likely places of employment for students that are graduating from our programs. If you look at this definition, we provide you the SOC itself, which you can click through and go to the government site where that is actually defined. You'll see the name of the occupation, which if you click on this will open Career Coach, which is our web-based exploration tool, and you can look at the specific labor market information to that individual occupation. You'll see on the right the 10th, 50th, and 90th percentile, which represents the wage curve, and then the estimated annual demand. So what we do within this definition is we aggregate this, if you look at the bottom, into the total, and from that we basically create a wage curve, which we will then use to analyze this grouping of occupations as almost one occupation. As we move over to the following page, you're seeing essentially the aggregate wage curve from that analysis. And as you can see, in this particular instance, we have the 10th, 50th, and 9th percentile for that grouping. We also go ahead and index two self-sufficiency standards. One at the, basically, I would call more of like a single mother scenario where you have one working adult and you have one child. That's in Finger Lakes in the Monroe County region, that's $18 an hour. And then at a two working adult, two children scenario, which for our region is $25 an hour. We have decided to index those onto the wage curve because it's important for us in terms of the work that we do that we have a sense of how any given occupational group will provide for eventually a family wage job. And so we think because this is designed for a workforce development community, we wanted to introduce this type of analysis to begin being used. On page 10 in this example, we have the actual dashboard. In each of the 23 occupational groups, we've created a dashboard for a region. And this is really, I would consider, the crux of this book. Within this dashboard, we actually have many things happening. At first, you can actually see each of the middle-skilled providers. They all produce, in this case, approximately 72 completions within 2012 that relate to the occupational definition that we showed you a couple slides back. We then show the estimated annual demand, which again came from that definition. And then we do a simple delta on that, which provides you the gap. In this case, it's showing us 159 gap annually between what's produced. I think that's an important operative word there, the production of a machinist or machining-related occupation against the estimated annual demand for the group. What this tells us, this is essentially a labor supply and demand analysis that we're using for our region. And what that shows us is that we have a pretty sizable gap. At the bottom, you'll see the total workforce of that occupational group across the 9-county region. And then you will also see the percent that are approaching retirement. That's important for us because if we see a gap now, we have older occupational demographics that are skewed to that older worker, and as such, we anticipate in the next 5 years plus having a pretty significant age out that will only contribute to the gap as we know it. So with this information, you can actually see what the gap is. And then in the next slide, which is a very important piece, we actually have for those occupations, there's 12 of them where we've applied this type of analysis, we do also show the estimated economic impact per completer. So we know right now in this example, we have a gap of 159. What we do also know because of the analysis we've done, we know that the overall impact per completer for a machinist in our economy is about $75,000 per year. And that's based on a model. You can look at that more explicit report that explains the methodology in the link below. But with this information, we're able to actually understand what it's worth to the economy to close that gap on a per completer basis. Lastly, as we follow this template through to its completion, we have the example of real-time labor market information. Using that occupational definition that we showed you, we're now looking at 3 years of job postings and trying to understand what were those postings asking for in terms of skill sets. And what we see is, in this case on the left, a skill clusters analysis where using that technology we're seeing the categorized skill sets, and you can see what those look like. And on the right, you're seeing the individual skill sets in a rank order priority of how they're listed. And as such, as you would expect for machining, you would expect the most common skill set requested in online postings would be machining, and that's what you see, and then you can see how those break down. We use this information not to show demand per se, but we use it to actually show the specification of labor that's being sought on the market for machinists. And that has value in terms of augmenting our advisory boards and looking at whether our curriculum has current learning outcomes that match the market. So that's essentially the template. We apply this template to all 23 occupational groups in the book. The very last piece is that we have acknowledgments in the appendix. We actually go into some of the details, particularly around self-sufficiency, if you're interested. That's really the core of the report. I hope you found this useful and informative. At MCC's Economic Development and Innovative Workforce Services, we look forward to partnering with you in the future to keep your workforce moving forward. Thank you for your time.